We know that if we get all the performance uplifts working properly, we're going to get 10% on bottom line for free. Then I just posed the question, well, do you think you could be better? And everyone said, maybe. I said, I tell you what, let me find you half a working day a week in 4 minutes.
Welcome to the Sound Leadership Podcast, the show that helps you build awareness and inspire personal responsibility through action. Hit subscribe, give us a follow, and leave your comments. Chris, welcome to Sound
Pleasure.
Leadership. Thank you so much for making the journey up here to see us as well.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. I was thrilled when you said yes to coming on the podcast. And part of the reason behind that is that I've followed your career to a certain extent, not in a strange way.
That's worrying, but no, please carry on.
And the reason that's happened is that some years ago, I was working with a company when I first started delivering training, helping them solve some communication problems. And what they were trying to do was communicate from top to bottom through the organisation. And I was doing my research and I found this video of you.
Okay.
So I thought we'd play that to you and have a look at it. And it was called Team Talk.
Yes.
Is this ringing any bells?
That is a long time ago.
It is. From your days with Transport for London.
Yes.
And the reason this stuck with me is that the simplicity of it, and all things are, there's lots of complexities behind the scene, but the simple message of it, and it's something I've used and told the story of to our clients many times. So should we have a little watch?
Yeah, let's have a look. Let's roll back the years, because that is a long time ago. We have the union on one side, we have the politicians on the other side, and in the middle we have 25,000 employees who are scared witless that they are going to end up in a situation where their life's work just disappears, they're going to be made redundant, blah, blah, blah. What we had to do is we had to communicate with them on a regular basis to ensure that it happened. And we went back to doing the most simple stuff. We would have monthly briefings by the chief executive for 400 of the top managers. And we set up Team Talk. And what Team Talk was quite simply, at the end of that briefing, they would be told, this is what we want you to tell your people. This is the key message, and this is what you have to do in your own words to explain how your people support that happening. We then said, you then have to have team meetings, and you have to tell the people who are your managers that they have to tell their managers within 5 working days of them receiving the message. And that they cannot change the first slide, but they can change the second slide. So we knew that the message from the chief executive got top to bottom without being changed in 5 weeks. And that at every meeting, there was a discussion about how we in this room are going to support making that happen. 2 years ago, that went in 1999. In 2012, I met the HR director of London Underground. And she said to me, do you know, Team Talk is still working exactly as you put it in 1999. And that just confirms to me, if it's simple and it does its job, it will stay. It's a blast from the past, but it is absolutely true that if things are simple, practical, and work, they will keep rolling. That was obviously a complete massive restructure, and therefore communication was critical to success. And in all my experience, I have repeatedly seen transformations grind to a halt because of, more than anything, lack of communication. People don't have a compelling vision. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what their involvement is, and they don't understand what the next step is. And it's interesting that the principle of a cascade, people say, this communication stuff is complicated. No, I'm sorry. In 1975, there used to be an organization called the Industrial Society. And the Industrial Society was an organization that promoted good management. They published in 1975 a little green booklet called
Team Briefing for Line Managers. And that little booklet was a roadmap for line managers to run regular team briefings with their teams, how to do it, how to enable people to understand the big picture, how to enable people to give feedback, even how to enable people to ask questions, and then how to feed the questions up the organization to the level where they could get an answer and then cascade it back down. That was 1975. That is 50 years ago. And we still have people saying, A, I don't have team meetings, and B, I'm not sure how to communicate. Please. I mean, unfortunately, I can't say go and buy the booklet because it's now 50 years ago and it's probably out of print. But it's those core principles that work anywhere. And it's not just about change and transformation, because that core team briefing process should be happening regularly under business as usual. But you have to ramp it up if you're doing change.
What stuck with me for that is the way you've said, that confirms to me that if it's simple and it does its job well, it will stay.
Yes.
And it's something that I've seen, and I think Darren probably, our roles, that we tend to overcomplicate things in business. And look, I know, there's lots of complexities, but when especially with communication, let's keep it simple, keep it clear. And often we fluff it up with a whole load of other words, and let's just get to the point. And especially, crisis management and those high stakes situations, a restructure, redundancies, for example, let's get the message across as clear as we can.
Well, there's a challenge though in terms of leader psychology, in that if you're a leader and your boss has said, I want you to give me a plan to do this, and you say, okay, I could actually put a clear, concise plan on one side of paper. But then if I do one side of paper that's clear and concise and give it to my boss, they'll look at it and think, well, that didn't take much time or work, did it? So the natural proclivity of leaders is to say, well, no, it could be one page, but I tell you what, I can make it 10 and I can bulk it out. So when I give it to my boss, they're really impressed that I've done so much. No, you haven't done so much. You've just confused everybody. This goes back to my military past, which quite simply said that it is about keeping it simple. And that every time you introduce complexity, if you introduce additional steps within a process that need to be done, you are increasing time, you are increasing the use of resources, and you are increasing risk. And that's what I say to commercial managers. If you keep it simple, it's going to be cheaper, faster, and less risky.
Yeah, interesting. The cheaper point as well, isn't it? It's going to save you money.
Correct.
Yeah. And often we don't look at it from that perspective.
And I think a lot of people have experienced, those team briefings at times, but because there's no purpose around those team briefings, they don't do them anymore because they're not worthwhile. And actually, I think what I take from that video is setting that clear process. This is what you can change. This is what you can't. This is what I want communicated down. These are the conversations I want to happen. Actually creating that clear purpose of this is why this meeting is happening and this is what we want to come out of it really adds that structure that people buy into.
It's the critical point within those meetings is the ability to explain the big picture. Yeah. Because the team knows pretty much what it's doing. But if you look at particularly the performance elements around teams, the evidence is absolutely clear. You need to explain the big picture from a performance perspective because we know, for example, corporate executive board data, employees who know how they contribute to the big picture can potentially give 36% more effort. So there's a performance factor there, but there's also an understanding and a collaboration factor in that if your people understand the big picture, they also understand what other people are doing. If they understand what other people are doing and how they contribute to the big picture, it gives them the ability to align to what those people are doing. It creates a common language. The ability to have a common language and to align with other people breaks down silos. The ability to understand the end goal also means it gives you agility and the ability to innovate. Because if you understand where the end destination is, if you hit a problem, then you can find another route to the same solution. Now, interestingly, the military introduced the concept of what was called mission command in the sort of late 80s. And mission command was effectively empowerment, which said what you tell people is you tell people what the big picture is, you tell them what needs to be achieved, you effectively tell them what resources they have, and you give them guidance on potentially how it should be done. But because you have given them the end result, you then give them the freedom to change it as and when required due to circumstances. And it's that whole concept of empowerment. You can't empower people if they don't know where they're going.
So I had an operations director that I was working with a long, long time ago. And she was always, her buzzword at the time was accountability, which to me ties in with, empowerment, responsibility, ownership. And I kept saying to her, but what do you mean? Which like, well, everyone needs to be accountable. Yeah, but what does that look like and what does that mean? Yep. So as a leader, we've got to be able to communicate why we need to be accountable, but what are we being accountable for? And what is it? I totally agree in terms of what's our bigger picture, what's our objective out here that we're trying to work towards. Otherwise, we don't know what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And that naturally feeds into all the stuff around meaningful work. The Great Resignation in terms of why people left, it was all around things about I don't think my boss values me. I don't think the organization values me. No one's paying any attention to me in terms of what I want to do. I'm not being developed effectively. I don't see a career path and I don't have meaningful work. Well, if you just take that little part that we're currently discussing, the big picture, if you have the big picture, you are inevitably going to be getting more meaningful work because you see why you are doing it. And the beauty of all of these things is all of these little things that happen all intermesh to create an environment where people give their best.
Let's just stick with your early career for a second. And in the army?
Yes.
Yeah. How did that sort of scope or influence your leadership style throughout the rest of your career?
I think you could probably say that it was fundamental. Okay. First of all, it's not actually necessarily that easy to get into Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And one of the things that confuses people about the sort of commercial recruitment and military recruitment and how it all works is it's effectively what happens is that commercial organizations recruit on technical capability. And then what they do is they assume we can add leadership capability on top of that as and when necessary. Okay. Normally, nowadays in commercial organizations, it's we recruit on technical capability, we get them in, we suddenly realize they can't lead, we then panic and send them on a leadership program. The military world is different. The military recruits on leadership capability. They assess people's innate leadership capability in terms of working with teams, how they behave under pressure. The principle being that if you have leadership capability, you can be given technical capability. If you don't have leadership capability, okay, I should caveat that by they are looking for people who can exhibit leadership capability within the sorts of environments that the military are likely to encounter. Not just your average office. Therefore, they are looking at a level of leadership capability that is top 10%. However, the principles of the execution of competent leadership can be delivered by anybody if they're given a roadmap to do it and want to do it. Yeah. Some people don't want to be leaders. Some people do want to be leaders. But even if somebody's not sure about if they want to be a leader, with the right roadmap, with the right support, they can be competent. They won't necessarily be great. They won't necessarily be the most inspirational because it's that element that can come from personality, but they'll do a good job. So, when people say, I can't be a leader, you say, well, no, you can. There's a beautiful quote that people say, oh, well, leaders are natural. They're you can't train leaders. Interestingly, someone called General Montgomery from the Second World War said in 1947, there are principles of leadership just as there are principles of war, and these can be learnt. Now, that was 1947. Even now, in 2025, we have people saying that leadership can't be taught. It was bad enough going back to 1975 with the team briefing, but we're now going back to 1947. So, I think there is so much confusion about what leadership is and a lack of clarity that we have a body of leadership that is quite technical around change, transformation, psychology, wellness, and all the rest of it. But the view I take is the problem is that we have a massive gap in terms of the fundamentals, the foundational elements. If you take, and that links back to my military experience, because what happens at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, they don't teach you how to lead first. They teach you how to deliver tasks first. So the focus is on prioritization, time management, delegation, communication, and feedback. Getting those right under increasing pressure means that you are in control of the task. Once you are in control of the task, it then gives you the time bandwidth to lead. If you now apply that out to the commercial world, where many leaders, because they've not been given the fundamentals, are not in control of the task, they then don't have bandwidth to lead. And that's why I say what I say, in that we need to put the fundamentals in place, because unless the fundamentals in place, nothing else is going to work. And the simple fact is, you can take any stats you like around this corporate executive board, mine, Chartered Management Institute. The estimate is that 80% of leaders, at least, are missing the fundamentals.
It's so important, because without those fundamentals, that feedback, that delegation, that empowering the team, what happens at times of stress is those leaders end up going back to their safe space, that's the technical. Because that's what they're trained to do. They're given that. And that then stunts the growth. That means that they don't lead at that high level. And that reduces the impact that leaders are having.
Absolutely. And that's why I made that point in relation to Sandhurst and the military part. Because all of that experience then gave me the fundamentals so that I was successful. The challenge I had was, as someone who was senior in L&D, was it took me about 15 or maybe more years I was looking at, how can these people be just so incompetent at doing leadership? And it took me time to say, whoa, take a step back. They haven't been given the training that you've been given. They haven't been given those fundamentals, because what's happened is that you've been using those for so many years that you have internalized them. You don't even realize that your thought process is now automated around what you learned at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. But what that then revealed was it then revealed that drastic skills capability gap that I'm now referring to. So that was the biggest lesson of the military, that foundation is absolutely critical for success. I would suggest that the other element that the military taught me was the true idea that actually good leadership can turn a group of individuals into a team that is capable of doing things that the people in the team never believed they could possibly do themselves.
I'm just reflecting as you're talking there, Chris, that often we're in a rush to get somewhere in our careers.
Yes.
The analogy I'd use is that, if you're building a house, you build the foundations first. You don't put the roof on first. So you build the foundations, and you go through those experiences in your early career. You put yourself in those situations where you learn from others, you learn from the experts around you. And then I'd talk about, scaffolding. So you put a bit of scaffold up and then you go to the next level and you scaffold and you go to the next level in terms of your understanding around leadership. And then you can start to have a bit of an influence. And I think, for people listening to this that are at the start of their journey, don't rush it too quickly. Take your time to build up those foundations and get a real solid fundamentals.
But there, to some degree, I would say to individuals who are starting their careers, the problem is not with you. The problem is with organizations, and the fact that, in my view, leadership development in organizations is broken. Full stop. So what we're doing is we're saying to people, this is how to manage change. This is how to create psychological safety. Oh, but by the way, we haven't even taught you how to delegate. I'm sorry. So you want people to do change and they've never been taught how to delegate. What are leaders supposed to do on a day-to-day basis if it is not delegate? Okay. Everybody listening to this who is a leader will be delegating because they've worked out how to do it. When I speak to leaders around the world, the fundamental question is, okay, you're doing it because you're in this room as a leader. But could you be better? If you had been taught how to delegate effectively, would you be better than you are now? And so I take delegation as a specific example. When I speak, I use Slido, so I get accurate figures of the data from the audience. And on average, pretty much, I would say, when I ask the question, how many of you who have been taught in a structured way how to delegate or not to the audience, ballpark, at least 75% to 80% say no. Yeah. Pose the question, well, do you think you could be better? And everyone said, maybe. I said, I tell you what, let me find you half a working day a week in 4 minutes. So what I do is and for everybody listening to this, you need to do this if you're a leader. I say quite simply, do this. Write on a piece of paper or whatever, 2, 3, or 4 tasks that you do on a regular basis. Look at each of those tasks and ask yourself the question, could I delegate those tasks? If you could, who would you delegate them to? Then have a look at all the tasks, and the ones where you could delegate, how much time per week would you save if you delegated them? I say, I will now be back to you in 90 seconds. And I want you to go back into Slido and tell me how much time you have saved. So they can put in 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, or more than 8 hours. Consistently, you will get sort of 25-ish% doing 0 to 2, 35 coming up, 37%, 2 to 4. Some more will be about the same. We'll be doing 4 to 6 hours. Oddly, there always seems to be a gap between 6 and 8. I don't know why, consistently. Then there is always, every audience, anywhere in the world, there is a group of 15 to 20% who save over 8 hours a week from a 3-minute exercise. Now, they're lucky because I say to them they can now take a day off. But it just, if you think about it, it just emphasizes the point. In 3 minutes, by doing the most simple possible delegation exercise, the people in the room have saved, on average, half a working day a week. When I say to the people in the room, now for those of you who have been in leadership roles for 10 or 20 years, just think how many half days a week there are in 10 or 20 years if somebody had taught you this on your first appointment. And have a think about what you could have used that extra time for in terms of thinking about the future, strategic thinking, working out how to develop your career. And that is why I say that leadership development is broken. Because if I can produce that time saving in 3 minutes, think about how much performance uplift you could deliver as an organization if you got all of your leaders into a room and spent half a day, just 4 hours, on prioritization, time management, delegation, communication, and giving feedback. Now, that's half a working day just on delegation, We haven't even talked about prioritization. We haven't even talked about the 30% extra performance you can get when people are able to distinguish between urgent and not important and not urgent. We haven't even talked about the performance uplift you get when people are able to give feedback effectively. We haven't even talked about the performance uplift when people, as per our previous element of the conversation, communicate effectively about the big picture, and the 36% additional effort people give when they see why what they do contributes to the big picture. And what I find so absolutely nuts, so frustrating, is that we are not talking about sending people to Harvard and paying $50,000. We are talking about half a day that a good trainer can deliver like that, and that the uplift is immediate. The uplift is not 6 months down the road. When those people leave that room, they have 4 things they can delegate, and they are already delivering return on investment. So anybody who, to be blunt, any CFO who is listening to this should be saying to themselves, hang on, if we can get half a working day to deliver this to our people, one, with that exercise, they're going to save half a working day every week from now on. So investing half a working day a week now is a complete no-brainer. 2, we get the performance uplift. And 3, as Chris said, we know that if we get all the performance uplifts working properly, we're going to get 10% on bottom line for free. So actually, it should be CFOs that are saying, we need to do this. In fact, I have spoken to CEOs and CFOs. I literally do a keynote called How Would You Like 10% on Bottom Line for Free? And a previous finance director of Vodafone came up to me afterwards and said, Chris, why did no one tell me about this? And I said, I don't know. Maybe speak to your HR director. He said, this is mad. This is a license to print money. We should be doing this for years. You know, this is money that, as an investment, I don't have to make an investment, but I get a return for no investment. He said, that's bonkers. And it is. But people don't understand the power of it.
It's that compound, isn't it? Do it today and it will grow.
Yes.
Fail to do it today, wait 1 year, 2 years, 10 years,
yes,
it won't grow. In your opinion, at what point in a management journey should these technical skills be trained? Should it be first appointment or early on?
On appointment. Yep. What's really, really interesting is if you go back into the dim and distant dark days of the 60s and 70s, when organizations like GEC and the sort of big industrials, Rolls-Royce, all of those organizations had a program that put these things in place for first-line managers. It was part of what was expected. And, you know, there are, for example, we'll say, there are some major German corporations that still do that, particularly engineering ones like Siemens and all the rest of it. What happened was that as we went through the financial dramas of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, inevitably, as we know, historically, the first thing that gets cut is training budgets. And those things disappeared. And they have never been put back in. And we are suffering the consequences still today. If you just think about the impact of that half working day from that one delegation exercise across an organization of 10,000 people, of 20,000 people, when you think about the impact of that, if we'll say 50% of the organizations in this country did that half morning exercise, the impact on A, investor performance, keep the investors happy, and B, the economy, would be billions.
Most common complaint is, I haven't got enough time.
Yes, precisely. And that is the vicious circle. So, yeah, what I talk about now is how you can utilize that to get business as usual to excellence level. And then the next stage is then how you build a business of the future once you've got there.
I'm sitting here reflecting on the the huge scale of that, the impact on business it's massive for putting in half a day's training. It's a no-brainer.
Complete, an utter no-brainer.
I'm going to pick your brains about high performance in a minute.
Sure.
Before we do that, you've had a bit of recognition recently, haven't you? So tell us about the award that you've just given.
I think it was a couple of months ago. I was asked to join the HR Hall of Fame, HR Magazine. So since 2006, HR Magazine, Sean Harrington, the editor there, started the HR Most Influential Awards, which is to pick out the 20 or 30, depending on the year, most influential HR practitioners and the most influential HR thinkers. I have, for whatever reason, have been honoured to be one of the most influential thinkers 10 times since, the award started 2006. I was first on 2009, so 10 times since then. And then all of a sudden, they rang me up and said, we want to get you into the HR Hall of Fame. So, which is a fairly elite club. But my acceptance speech was actually about how HR needs to start really presenting itself as a function that is a catalyst for business success, not a function that delivers HR. And that links to the conversation we've just had about critical fundamental capabilities. And that flips into the whole inability of some of the HR community to see the holistic big picture around how the organization works. They'll see the HR elements, but they won't see the other holistic elements. And so, for example, let's just take well-being, psychological safety. Yes, we want well-being. Yes, we want psychological safety. But, it's how you get that isn't putting people on a well-being course or all the rest of it, because we go back. Mindfulness I was invited to a mindfulness conference. Now, having spent a year advising the NHS, including some mental health trusts, I am aware of the value of mindfulness work for people who are having mental health issues. And for that, it is amazingly powerful. But when you have people saying, we need to give everybody in an organization mindfulness training because they're stressed, we need to help them deal with the stress. Unfortunately, I was somewhat provocative because in the interval I asked a question. Well, hang on, rather than just reduce the impact of the stress, why don't we try and remove the stress by giving them better leaders who don't stress them out, by training leaders better? And then maybe we won't need to actually have mindfulness training, other than for those who perhaps want it. And there was a sort of stunned silence. And I said, mindfulness is important, but why are we trying to deal with the symptoms rather than the cause?
HR at times in some of the organisations I've worked with is sort of in its own little cupboard, and people don't really know what it does or how it fits in. And it's about embedding HR within that organisation. That, systems thinking, as I called it before, is actually how does all the pieces of the puzzles fit together?
Yes.
And how can HR solve some of those wellbeing issues to say, root cause says we need to deal with stress in this organisation, not the result of stress, but stress. And how can HR support teams, knowledge, training, all those things to go, I'm giving you the tools to reduce the stress in the team, whether that's better leadership or other things that then help sustainably the organisation and people in it going forward.
There is an industry on knocking HR. Financial Times people, HR is garbage or all the rest of it. Yeah, I can reflect on my military experience because within the military at unit level, there are no HR functions. The team leader is responsible for everything that happens in the team. The development of people, the difficult conversations, the career and all of that is down to the officer in charge of the team. That's what leaders should be doing. One of the challenges I think that HR faces is that over the years, either through HR offering to do it or line managers expecting to do it, many things that line managers should be doing have been chucked into the HR bucket. Now, I over the years, I've played with an interesting exercise. So I've produced an A4 sheet of paper with various things that happen in teams. So developing people, difficult conversations, talking about pay, and just things like that. And there was about 10 of them. And then there's a column with boxes, and it says at the top, HR, line manager. And I give them to HR people and line manager people, and I say, okay, tick the ones that you think are the responsibility of those people. And so the line managers put lots of stuff in that they say HR is responsible for. The HR people, interestingly, put some of the stuff actually that they say they're responsible for, but the line manager should be doing, because they've got into the habit of helping line managers do it. And generally speaking, the lists don't agree at all. There is a fundamental disconnect between what line managers think HR should be doing, what HR thinks line managers should be doing, and actually what the optimum is for both of them to do, that is very, very rarely explored. When you then underline that challenge with the lack of fundamental skills. So when I'm talking, I don't criticize HR leaders for not being able to make this work, because again, HR leaders have not been given the fundamentals of leadership. So they're in a catch-22 themselves. But I've spoken to massive audiences of HR leaders around the world. The fundamental problem is that HR is trying to do too much. And it needs, if you take Dave Ulrich's human capability model, which includes all the stuff that has to be done in organizations around talent, around all of those things, development of talent, culture, all the sort of basics, pay, blah, 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 blah. When you look at all of the things that need to be done in organizations, there is a significant group of activities that HR cannot deliver itself, but which are HR activities which need to be done. So let's take identifying and developing talent. HR has responsibility for making that happen, but the people who implement it are line managers. It is the line managers who are involved in the identification process because they're seeing the people. It is the line managers who should be developing those people on the job. The problem is that they're not, which means that HR has a problem. But we then get back to our fundamentals. And what I say to HR leaders is quite simply this. Look, you need to get these things done. You can't do them. They, the line managers, have to do them. But they've got lots of other stuff to do. And I say, look, think about it like this. I'm a line manager. I've got my own work to do. I've got to make sure my team does the work it has to do. I've actually got to keep my boss happy and make sure that that's going on. And also I've got to think about this strategic stuff. And on top of that, being a human being, I've got to remember that the kids have to be picked up from school, the dog's got to go into the vet, the car needs a service next week. So our brains, because I did a 6-month part-time neuroscience course, our brains are limited in the number of things that they can keep ticking over at any one time. Now, so if they're line managers and they've got all of these things going on in their heads already, and HR comes along and says, hey, let's do some talent development. No, that is above the red line, because the prioritization of talent development versus the prioritization of other things is low. The human brain is designed, and no matter what we think we're doing, the human brain focuses on surviving and thriving. The human brain automatically prioritizes activity in terms of its return on investment to us as an individual. What that means is that line managers are going to be saying, okay, what do I do? Do I keep my boss happy or do I keep HR happy? The decision is quite easy. That's the challenge that HR leaders have. So what they're doing is They are trying to sell HR as something line managers need to do for the benefit of HR. They need to start thinking like a salesman. They need to start thinking like a consultant. And what I say to HR leaders is, you know that all of those things are going on in the heads of those line managers. That's stressing them out. So what you say to them is, I tell you what, how about if I help you do all of those things that are stressing you out more successfully? And what you then do is you give them that half-day leadership development program that finds them more time. Because that half-day leadership development program not only finds them more time, it also means that they are better at getting the best from people. It also means that they are able to more effectively do things like identify talent. And because they're delegating, they have that bandwidth to do it. So you are therefore presenting them with an opportunity to make themselves more successful through making them better leaders. But as they become better leaders for their team, they are also doing what you in HR need them to do to implement the people agenda. That, if HR leaders can make that happen, it works. But the HR leaders have to be given the fundamentals in the first place, so they have the bandwidth to speak to the line managers. And it's this catch-22, it's this vicious circle that organizations need to break somewhere.
I was thinking about that. A lot of the HR leaders that we would typically deal with are the ones that are organising the training for other people.
Yes.
And not looking after themselves. Yes. It's almost like the parent that neglects their own health, fitness, well-being because everything's focused on the child, and often it's about, you look after, and it's not selfish, but look after yourself first, get your fundamentals right, and then you can support others as well.
And it is this process of thinking not as an HR person, but as a manager. It's interesting, on all the teams that I've had over my career, some of the best people that I've ever had on my teams have not started their careers in HR. They've started their careers elsewhere. So when they get to HR, they have an understanding of the holistic organization. They have a set of networks that is outside HR that goes into the operational side of the organization. But that then makes them brilliant HR people. One of the things in terms of getting line managers to understand this is there is a confusion about what line managers need to do. Because the two things, virtually nobody has actually said to line managers, right, as a line manager, your specific responsibilities in terms of people are this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, you have performance management programs. But for example, it's performance management. You need to develop people. Line manager interpretation, I send people on a course. HR interpretation, you need to develop them on the job. Completely different interpretations. Now, we know that obviously on-the-job development is really important. But then we go back to the problem about how many line managers have been given development on how to develop on the job. Line managers need a roadmap, and that's what I talk about now, which is quite simple. The roadmap it's 6 steps, and it's, first of all, you need to get business as usual to excellence level. There are 3 steps to that. 1, optimize task delivery, which is what we spoke about. Prioritization, time management, delegation, communication, giving feedback. That then gives line managers bandwidth. That bandwidth then allows them to get the best from their people through engagement, through emotion, through being a best boss with those. I spoke about earlier the experience of going around the world and asking audiences of different cultures, different sectors, what did your best boss do day to day that made them special? And every single audience in the last 15 years has given me the same list of 10 to 12 things. Exactly the same list. It is mind-blowing. The first time I did it was in the UK. About 6 months later, I did it with the top 50 leaders of the Chinese space program in Beijing. And when they came out with the same list, I realized that I had stumbled across something which was unbelievable. So we've gone from, for example, investment bankers in London to senior scientists in a communist corporation in Beijing. And when you ask them what were the things that their best boss did that made them special, they are exactly the same thing. To the point, it is about humanity. And that then gets the best. Then when you get the best, what do you do with all of that extra effort? When I say get the best, we'll take an example. One of the things that repeatedly comes out is asked for my ideas, showed how I fitted in the bigger picture. Corporate executive board data, if you do that, you can get 36% more effort than a line manager who doesn't bother. Just showing you care can get 25% more effort. When you're doing those things as a generality, either you as an individual or the organization, you can get 30% more effort from 60% of people. That 30% more effort from 60% of the people is the bit that directly leads into potentially 10% on bottom line for free. Now, that's getting the best from people, but you want to do something with that best. And the next stage is you focus that best onto the big picture. The alignment of operational objectives to strategic objectives. To our point about team briefings, to our point about explaining the big picture to everybody. Everybody needs to know what the big picture is, because then that adds further multipliers, because it confirms that they're doing meaningful work. It breaks down silos. It gives them agility, so if things go wrong, they can take a different route. That can potentially improve effectiveness by another 20 to 30%. So when you've done optimized task delivery, get the best from people and focus on to what needs to be done in terms of current objectives, that's getting you business as usual to excellence level. But that's not enough. And what we did at UBS, which is now a Harvard case study, we took it further. We introduced entrepreneurial leadership for the first time in the corporate world. And it was based on the fact that we knew that there were some significant market opportunities that no one was touching in the wealth management world. And we needed people to be entrepreneurial to go out and seize these opportunities. And the question was, how do we make people who have been in a large bank for 20 years entrepreneurial? Fortunately, I had spent 6-7 years working with founders and entrepreneurs when I came out the army, helping them develop leadership. So we took some of the behaviors that I and other people had seen from successful entrepreneurs, and we started developing the top 500 leaders in UBS. UBS at the time was about 80,000, into these behaviors. So everybody's responsibility is to deliver success, not just their own job. Optimize risk, not minimize risk. Everybody understands the whole organization and how it works, not just their own part. Constant efficiency and simplicity. Constant innovation. Every employee is a proactive brand ambassador. And it was those behaviors that we started developing. Interestingly, it worked unexpectedly well, which is why that's now a Harvard case study, why the bank rocketed up the rankings, because you had a sudden group of people who were looking for opportunities. Then they seized opportunities, and that builds the business of the future. So the second phase is, after you've got business as usual to excellence level, develop entrepreneurial leaders. They seize the opportunity. That builds the business of the future. And it's that 6-step roadmap that I explain to leaders. This is what you need to do. Doesn't matter what organization you're in. Fundamentally, it's those 6 steps. But you can't be clever and dive in halfway around the circle. So you can't be an entrepreneurial leader if you haven't done the previous steps, because it's a foundation building on foundation, building on foundation, which goes back to the beginning of what we discussed, which is the optimization of task delivery has to be the first step. And if those fundamentals are not in place, as we know, nothing else will work optimally afterwards. And you will not get past step 2.
And it's so interesting because listening, I think back to my previous sort of work in life, and I can pick out some of those steps. But in a lot of those times, what was missing was that employee engagement stage.
Yes.
And then businesses would try and jump to that entrepreneurial leadership where people go, you've got to take responsibility of your work in life. But now, just through you talking, coming up in my mind is we haven't given them the skills to get to this level because we haven't given them that engagement level and we haven't given them the technical skills to build upon it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's essentially saying to somebody, you don't need driving lessons to drive a car.
Yeah.
Just go and drive it. Yeah, okay, fine. The chaos that would cause on the roads, think about it. The analogy is you've got leaders out there who haven't done their leadership driving test who are causing chaos in organizations because no one's made sure they're safe to do it. And one of the things that I'm constantly saying, as a result of all of this, without doubt, every single leader out there has at least 10% hidden performance potential that they haven't touched, that they don't even know they've got.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because one of your philosophies, one of your stats is that you say 80% of organisations are sitting on 10% of hidden, untapped performance. Well, that's incredible.
Yeah, and it is probably significantly more than that. If you just take that one delegation exercise as finding every leader in the organisation roughly half a working day a week, and then you start adding the other parts in, when I said 10%, I was talking to colleagues and I said, what shall I say? 10% is the absolute minimum. Yeah. And the 10% is what all the figures would suggest that you can get in terms of additional profit. So to get 10% additional profit, the back end feeder of that probably has to be an increase in employee engagement by, say, 15%. So the figures at the back end are slightly larger to feed through to a smaller increase in profit because that's how the sort of system works through. But the other thing is that this links to the degree to which talking about change, empowerment and all of those other things and the power of those basics. When people sort of say to me, well, how can you make change happen? How can we get stuff done? I talk about adopter curves. Yeah. So for those of you who are watching or listening, an adopter curve is effectively an analysis of a standard group of employees or people and their responses when a boss walks in the room and says, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have another great initiative. Now, the normal distribution ballpark is about 15 to 17%. We'll say, lovely, a lovely new initiative, whoopee. 65, 75% will say, or 80% will say, an additional 65, 70% will say, seen this before. I'm going to sit on the fence and watch what happens. I'm not going to engage. I'm going to sort of semi-engage. And then we have some 10, 15% who don't want to play the game. In the current world, when leaders do things like that, it means that the people who are up for the challenge have to persuade, ballpark, 4 people who are not convinced to join the club. We will ignore the people who don't want to play. They can be dealt with later. By doing those 6 steps, the first 2 steps, by having those leadership fundamentals, by being able to develop emotion, what then happens is that you move the curve so that your early adopter group gets up to 25 to 30%. The not sure about it then reduces, and the we don't want to play move into the not so sure. The fundamental point is that when you get your early adopter group up to 25% or more, you have a tipping point, you have a critical mass. because those people then only have to convince 2 people each that it's a good idea. And all of my experience of major transformation projects I've led or been involved in is that actually if you can get that move from 17% early adopter to 25% early adopter through good leadership, you're pretty much sure it's going to work.
That's really interesting. I've not heard it explained that way before. When, my understanding of it, or, research had shown me where I've seen it before, it's the sort of 16 to 18% is the tipping point, and it was a fixed point. So it's interesting hearing about that shifting. The other thing that always interests me with this is the laggards at the end of it, that we're never going to change their mind.
Yep.
And there'll just be some people that are not going to get on board with it. What do we do with those? Because I think in business, we waste a lot of time in the wrong places.
Yes.
And, if we look at that, we go, right, so we've got maybe 15% that are on board with this. Well, if we can increase that to 25%, as you said, then that becomes the major tipping point. Then we implement, champions, for example, and that actually they'll go and sell our ideas to the rest of the business without us having to force them to do it, because they're passionate about it.
Yes, exactly.
What do we do? Do we do anything with the 15% laggards at the end of it?
We have to do something, because if you take the data from Gallup or other places linked to employee engagement, and for those who are listening who aren't HR people, employee engagement effectively means people giving their best. Yeah. And actually, I might as well throw this in for leaders listening. There are 3 groups of people you need to know about, and that links to the adopter curves. There's those who are engaged, who are effectively the people who are up for it. There's those who are called not engaged, who are the people who are sitting on the fence, might be being engaged on Tuesday and Wednesday, but not rest of the week. And there are those who are called not engaged, who don't want to play. The evidence is that for every 1 who is not engaged, you need to have 4 that are engaged to mitigate the impact, the negative impact of the 1 not engaged on everybody else. So if you think about that's Gallup's data, and I've seen data from British Psychological Society and other places that sort of confirms those general principles. If you think about what is being said there, what that means is if you've got 10% who don't want to play, you've got to have 40% engagement to block their influence. That suggests that there is an imperative to deal with that particular group. My view has always been that people are not in that group because they want to be difficult. Human beings, with the neuroscience course and all the stuff I've done, human beings don't come to work to be difficult without a reason. Somewhere underlying their actions is a reason. If a leader is a good leader, they will be able to potentially find out what that reason is. Inevitably, the reasons will fall into 2 categories. 1, something that can be dealt with by the organization or by the leader. B, something that can't be dealt with. It could be personal circumstances or whatever. It could be that there is a family member who is seriously ill. And then it's a case of how do you deal with that? And if the reason is something that means that person is not going to be able to contribute, and I've done this with people, I've actually said, look, honestly, we both agree that you would be happier somewhere else. And I tell you what, let's help you find somewhere else. And one of my judgments in terms of organizations is that if the quality of helping people leave the organization is as good as the quality of getting people into the organization, then it's a quality organization.
Chris, I'm so pleased you said that. I think I've certainly been banging that drum for a long time. I think in businesses and organisations, we get so scared about, helping people leave the business. But if it's not right for that individual to be in your business,
yep,
for whatever reasons they have, they don't align with your objectives, the values don't fit, or something's changed in their life. They might have moved 2 hours down the road and they don't want to commute that far, whatever it might be. Then we end up with this toxic environment, this kind of resentment of they don't want to be there.
Yes.
That's so damaging. As you've just explained, it becomes so damaging in the business. As a business leader, what's the problem with helping that person with an exit strategy? And it doesn't mean, kick them out the door, off you go. Reputation and brand around that.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
It's reputational damage.
Yeah.
And organisations are better now in terms of thinking about reputational damage than they were, but they don't necessarily think it through. To your point, though, about departures, it's not just people who aren't playing ball. On a number of occasions, I have spoken to really high potential leaders. And what you find is inevitably in any organisation, because organisations are a pyramid structure, there are a limited number of places at the top. And inevitably you can have people who are absolutely top potential. And when you look at the organisational structure, you can see that individual is not potentially going to have a slot that they could go into for 5 years. They've worked that out. You've worked that out. Now, their boss can play it two ways. They can say, okay, I'll keep quiet. We'll see how long they put up with it. And then, of course, what's happening is eventually they'll leave, go to a competitor, whatever. In that situation, what I have done at C-suite level or just below, working with their boss, is to say, look, honest conversation. At the present moment in time, we cannot give you a role. Okay, yes, look at other roles in the organisation first, not just that department, but look across the whole piece. Because if they are that good, it is likely that there might be a role in a different part of the organisation that they could do. If they're going to be going to C-suite, then having had experience in different parts of the organisation is a critical success factor for a good C-suite. And one of the things we did at UBS was we made sure that all the people on the C-suite, okay, except the group council, had experience in different divisions. Then you turn around to the individual and say, look, in all honesty, you need to go somewhere else. You know that, we know that. So go somewhere else, get some more experience, and then when you think it's time to come back, we'll be in touch and you'll be in touch and you come back. And one of the most powerful figures that I see in organizations is their rehire rate. People who come back because they enjoyed it so much the first time.
And is that leadership is about your impact on others going forward? They don't always have to be under your control. I guess going back to that foundations again.
Yes.
Have leaders got those foundations to have those conversations though with people?
No.
And is that having an effect?
No. We are back. We are back to our, as I describe it, the elephant in the room that is there, that is pretty much making. Yeah, it's not making everything fail. What it means is, whilst those fundamentals are not in place, everything after that is suboptimal. It might scrape through via trial and error. It might be just as good as it needs to be, but not excellence, not optimized. And organizations, certainly organizations C-suite, need to make the decision: are we prepared to be just good enough, or are we proactively wanting to be the best? Are we proactively wanting to optimize? Because I've spoken about these fundamentals to the Chartered Securities Institute in London, the fund managers, the investment managers, blah, blah, blah. Top financial experts, the fellows of the Chartered Security. I've spoken to them 3 times about the potential return on investment from good leadership and putting these fundamentals in place. And they all see that. And one of the things organizations need to be aware of is that fund managers and investors are beginning to get quite savvy at looking at leadership as a return on investment issue. certainly within the private equity world and in M&A, they will do leadership assessments of organizations. Because why would you, and actually I spoke to investors at a big conference in Leeds a couple of months ago, why would you want to invest in an organization that's got 70% quality leadership? I wouldn't. Because I'd say, fine, if you want me to invest, all of you will do this half working day, because otherwise I'm not investing, because otherwise I'm risking my capital.
And we wouldn't accept 70% sort of success rate coming off a production line, 30% defects. We wouldn't accept that.
No.
Because it's in people, sometimes we allow that to get away with it.
Yeah. I mean, 70% isn't good enough. Let's face it. If NHS surgeons applied a 70% success rate, a lot of people wouldn't be very happy. Yeah. So if we can't, and if I go back to that previous example, driving tests, yeah, okay, fine, let 30% through. If they're not competent, who cares? It's just complete madness that we've got used to this, because it's the way that it's always been. If you think back to my comment about, it was way back in the 70s and 80s that these fundamentals were traditionally put in place in major industrials. We now have a group of leaders who was never given them, who've never experienced them, and you don't miss what you've never had. And that's why I use the word a hidden 10%. Because all of you listening, all of you leaders out there, you have that hidden 10%. You just don't realize it's there because you're assuming that you're doing as well as you can. What you don't realize is that your organizations over your career have not given you the fundamental capabilities you need. Sorry, there may be 20% of you out there who they have, but for 80% of you listening, they haven't. You have at least 10% additional performance inside you, potential, that you could get if you were given these fundamentals by your organization, or you listen to somebody like me. The implementation of this sort of stuff, this emotional powered leadership as well, because an employee's decision to give high performance is 60% rational, but it's also 40% emotional. So if you as leaders out there aren't building trust, aren't using belief to power getting people to do what needs to be done, you're literally throwing away 40% of your chances of success. And then it gets even more interesting. If employees have a commitment to their organization, if it's a rational commitment, these people seem to know what they're doing, they will give you 18% extra effort. That's corporate executive board data, so say 20%. If it is an emotional commitment, if they genuinely believe in what the organization is doing, the additional effort is 43%. It is the power of belief. And that every leader out there has the power to create that belief. Reason I mention that belief concept is for those of you listening, if you like podcasts, if you go to my website and you look on the menu, you'll see podcast. How I managed to get these people, I have no clue, but there are 23 podcast episodes, an amazing mix of people who have done amazing things, but they have done amazing things through doing the things that we have been talking about. The only thing that I found very difficult was that Robert Lefkowitz, Nobel Prize winner for physics, kept insisting that I called him Bob. And I'm afraid calling a Nobel Prize winner Bob really didn't feel quite right.
Just takes you to Blackadder, doesn't it?
Yes.
Brilliant. Let's wrap up with your top 3 leadership soundbites. What are your top 3 takeaways that our listeners can take from this?
I will tell you a story that actually summarizes, I think, what leadership is about. On the last night I was at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. We'd just done the passing off parade in front of the Queen Mother. We were all officially army officers, and very late I would say very late at night, actually very early the next morning, a very senior sergeant major from the Scots Guards who'd been training us came up to a colleague and I in the bar and said this. He said, "Gentlemen, if when you get to wherever you're going, you walk out on that first morning and see your first group of soldiers, you will have questions about them. I promise you that they will have questions about you. But they only have 2 questions. And the 2 questions are this. 1, does he know what he's doing? And 2, can I trust him? And he then said, if you get 2 yeses, I promise you those soldiers will work hard for you, go through hell for you, and if necessary, they will die for you. Now, for all of you listening, unless you happen to be in the military, for all of you listening, that latter one does not apply. But those 2 fundamental questions are what every employee, every team member is asking of their leaders and the other leaders in their organization. Do they know what they're doing? And can I trust them? And it is that fundamental trust that you have to build as a leader. And that pretty much sums it up.
Well, great way to wrap that up, and just such a powerful story. Chris, thank you so much for coming in. You've met and exceeded my expectations, going back from the video that I saw of you some years ago. And look, I was thrilled when you said yes, and I'm even more thrilled now having had this conversation. So many takeaways from it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I would say to everybody out there, listen to what we've discussed and just take 1 or 2 actions that you can go and do as of tomorrow and do them. Don't try and do it all. Just do 1 simple thing that will make a difference to you and your people.
Yeah, really sound advice. And thank you all for listening as well. Don't forget, hit subscribe to Sound Leadership. Leave a comment and let us know how Chris has helped you with your leadership skills as well. The Sound Leadership podcast was produced by Media First. To learn more about the media crisis and communications training, visit mediafirst.co.uk. The editor and producer was Darren Wingham. The show was hosted, written and researched by me, Dan Boniface. A special thanks to all the team at Media First and the BCF Group for supporting the development of this podcast. To learn more about the management, leadership, training and coaching that the BCF Group offer, visit thebcfgroup.co.uk or get in touch by emailing hello@thebcfgroup.co.uk. Finally, a special thanks to our exceptional guest today, who you can contact via the BCF Group.